Over the past few years, since Echoes of Service merged with Interlink and formed Echoes International, there's been an ongoing review of the priorities that Echoes International has in order to keep itself relevant to the world today and the needs of cross-cultural mission in the world today. And I think it would be good for us to have a conversation that unpacks some of the recent decisions, some changes, some continuities as well, in the way in which we will be operating at Echoes International. So I wonder whether you could just kick us off by talking a little bit about the needs of mission across the world now, and perhaps contrasting with how that has been in the past.
At the present moment, we reckon about 42% of the world haven't heard the gospel and have no access really to the gospel.
Which is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's two ways to look at that, the kind of glass half empty, glass half full. I see it as a success. God has used missionaries over the years, traditional models, which have revolutionized huge amounts of countries. A lot of South America, big part of the south of Africa, Europe, parts of Asia. And so that's something to give thanks for.
Amen.
But we need to make sure that we remember that the commission still stands. The Lord's command doesn't stop at 1950. It continues, and we're still commanded to go. But the going might be different. And the needs of the world are quite different today compared to where they were when Anthony Norris Groves left the country and set up in Baghdad. You couldn't do that today.
Yeah, of course, that's the thing, isn't it? That 42% of the world is unreached, as we would term it, and often unreached for very good reasons.
Yeah, most of them are in hard-to-reach areas now. There are quirks to that, but more or less, they're in difficult-to-reach parts of the world. And so we need to, in our strategy, as we're mission-driven, to recognise how do folk, if they're called by God, and God is sending them, the church are sending them to a difficult part of the world, how do they get there? And that's where our strategy has changed. So we recognise there's a number of different ways that people can get access. One is we've linked up with various agencies that we would see as strategic. And so because they've got teams in difficult parts of the world, it's easier for us to second someone into that team. The model of them serving isn't any different from a traditional model. It's just that they've got access through the visa, etc., into that particular area of the world. The other way is to work in a country. Still called, it's not a missionary tourism. It's still called by God. You're still serving in a particular area, but you're using your profession, whether it's education or engineering or medicine or whatever, and that allows you to be a witness in sometimes very difficult countries, but you're there legitimately. And it's not a case of being found out, but you can be a witness. Equivalent to that is running your own business. And we do know of individuals who have done this in various parts of the world, and there are still opportunities, and there's a great opportunity as well in running a business to employ nationals and witness to them as well. So these are all viable ways, and we need to make sure that Echoes is open to that, because we know that God is calling folks into these things, and we need to be relevant to our constituency as well. Another one is NGOs. Sometimes the only way to get into a difficult part of the world is through an NGO. Ostensibly, it looks like you're there for humanitarian aid or whatever, but actually, the visa gives you access to witness and preach the gospel.
And of course, there are other opportunities now that didn't exist in the times of Norris Groves. The internet, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
For getting into countries where there is restriction on gospel witness, or where someone who's exploring who Christ is can do that with anonymity, without fear that somebody's going to inform them, stuff like that.
And then you start to walk into what are the priorities we'd like to kind of prioritise. Digital is one of them. recognising the movement of people is another.
Migration.
There are millions of people coming to Europe and to the UK. Many of those folks would be in areas that are difficult to get with the gospel, but they're coming here. There's a phenomenon happened in Germany 5-6 years ago where many Afghans came to Germany, and there was a real revival took place. And folks were being saved who would never have had access to the gospel before, and the equivalent is happening in the UK. The other area is focusing on cities. Traditionally, again, back to the old models, missionaries would have gone to the coast of a country and worked in. Whereas going to a city, you've got a natural just hub of all sorts of different people groups, and that's an opportunity as well. So it's recognising different models and also recognising that the tactics to get to various places might be a little different.
Yeah, and I think that's that. Although that might, as a message, be something that is perhaps unusual to some people, I think recognising actually that there's a real biblical basis for so much of this.
Yeah.
Paul spent time tent making.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul is a great example of so many of these things. He strategically went to city after city because they were connecting points for so many people groups, and recognizing that actually even these methods that we're talking about as being perhaps less traditional are actually still very grounded in Scripture and the way in which we see the Bible demonstrating how mission can work.
It's interesting as well that if you use all those different examples like NGO and working and running a business, there are examples over the last even 30, 40 years of folks who are doing just that, and we're on the Daily Prayer Guide. So it's not like we've created something that's totally new. We're just recognising there's an opportunity here, and if someone does come and it's clear there is a call of God in their life to serve in a particular area, we have got a number of options to help them now, rather than how do we get the person in and how do we disguise them in getting in as well.
Yeah, and there's a credibility as well that comes with sometimes working in a country, employing people and that kind of thing. And I suppose a piece of work that it's worth sharing with those watching our conversation is that actually we've been gradually working through our policies and our processes to really smooth the way for those coming to us with a kind of a creative model of mission, as we might describe.
I mean, there is a danger that we talk in jargon, and I've used that phrase,
creative model of mission.
But at the end of the day, it's just a different way to access a difficult country. And we've got a number of options now, rather than trying to shoehorn somebody through and hope that the authorities don't notice.
So we've talked about a varied range of models of mission, and we've talked about how Echoes is perhaps changing its footing to be more able to support those models. In practical terms, how is that going to affect perhaps the way in which we mobilize and list new mission partners, for example, and support them?
Yeah, in some respects, all of the things that we've spoken about and have spoken about that are important, like the call of God, the church sending, none of that changes. That's all really, really crucial for us. But how we support could be quite different depending on who the person is serving. So for instance, if someone is running their own business or working in a country using their profession, there's not the same need for finance that there would be and gifting that there would be with a traditional model. And so we have to reflect on that and think about, well, how do we support a person? And all the other things of support are still there, whether it's pastoral, debriefing, all that sort of stuff. But there are occasions where the need for gifting is not as high as it would be for a traditional model. And also, there are some individuals who are better supported by the Commending Church and their contacts as well. And we're not talking about a lack of faith, but as stewards, the trustees of Echoes finances, I think it's important that we understand what the actual need of the mission partner is, and we tailor the way we support that person relative to that need.
And I think that's a really crucial point you make.
Yeah.
And it's something that actually we've done with a bit of our mission partners leading over the years. You know, we've had mission partners have come to us and said, actually, I am well supported at the moment. Please don't give us a financial gift.
Yeah.
And so that's a recognition that Echoes has a finite amount of funds, and that it's important that we steward them and use them where they're needed.
And so I think when we do come across someone who is wanting to serve wherever they want to serve, it's right for us to assess the need of that mission partner and our recommendation to the trustees about what that support looks like. And in some, we will be supporting because they're going to an unreached area and it's a strategic need as well. But for others, because they are well supported or they're doing their own thing in terms of salary, etc., there's not the same requirement.
And I think what's coming out in what you've said there, Jim, is that our stance, which we're calling giving to need, is first of all relating to the needs of the mission partner who's being sent by their local church and listed with Echoes, but it's also relating to the needs of the place that they're going, and actually recognising that Echoes has a finite amount of finance that the Lord has entrusted to us, and we want to use it wisely for mission and for making sure that the gospel goes to where the gospel isn't.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant point. If you look at the world today and you look at that 42%, they mainly are in places where the church is least and there's very few gospel outreach, very little gospel outreach. And then you start to ask questions when you think of countries that have had a legacy of mission and they have been given great privilege in the number of missionaries who served there and the difference the gospel has made, and now in the number of assemblies that are in some of these countries. Some of them are in multiple thousands. Is there the same need for someone from the UK to go and serve in a place like that? And that's a relevant question. It's not saying there's a definite yes or no, but I think the trustees of Echoes International are rightfully asking the question, why would someone go and be sent to a place like that when there's a huge amount of the world where the need is greatest? I mean, I spoke about this a few days ago, take the need of Eastern Europe. If you look at the Joshua project and look at the number of least reached countries in the world, some of those countries are in Eastern Europe, on our very doorstep. Couple of hours flight from the UK. And there's a danger that we sometimes are attracted to where we always have heard about mission. So a good example of this is where a missionary comes from an area that's well supported and they talk about the report and rightfully so, and God's been very faithful, and there's an influence to think, well, I could go and do that. And I just think there's a need to make sure that when people are thinking about mission, if they think they're being called, to properly assess where the need actually is, rather than simply going where everybody's gone before. And that's a difficult thing, difficult road to walk from an Echoes perspective, Echoes International's perspective, but it's the right road to walk. We've talked about things that are changing, and we've talked about things that are remaining the same. One of the things that remains the same is prayer, and the importance of prayer. And you and I talk a lot about the DNA of Echoes International being prayer. So what does that mean? How can folk engage in prayer? What are the kind of key areas they can focus in on?
I think for me, a key aspect of praying for mission, it ties back into what we've already discussed, is understanding what parts of the world are not so well known. And saying, actually, I'm going to commit to pray for Tajikistan, where there are very few believers, where the church is persecuted. But not only that, I'm going to find out more.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element where there is a responsibility that is on Echoes International as a long-standing mission service group to be able to provide information to help the church to do that. So I think first and foremost it is obviously continuing to pray through the daily prayer guide, which will still exist in the same form as it always has, and pray through the mission partners that are supported by Echoes International, but also picking up on praying for unreached areas. That's something actually that we're starting to do a bit of work on in the daily prayer guide for this coming year, praying for the unreached, encouraging churches to engage in that task of becoming more familiar with the places where mission isn't, or where there is less mission work. So I think that's a really key thing. I think as well, we're keen at Echoes to communicate a little bit more precisely what people can pray for mission partners that they've been supporting. So looking at, for example, articles in the magazine about a certain aspect of mission life, raising children on the mission field, picking up on a podcast about how we can pray for mission partners who are single on the mission field. But actually developing that aspect of our prayer for mission partners that we support, I think that's another key thing. And I think, at Echoes, as a third point, we would always value prayer for ourselves. That we would continue to be relevant, that we would continue to be good stewards of what we've been given, and that we would be wise in how we look to support the next generation of mission partners who will go and serve the church or will serve to plant churches. So I think those would be my big 3 prayer points.
I think the other thing as well is encouraging people to access some of that information. So signing up to the weekly prayer email, making sure that they're signed up to the magazine and they're following both the monthly and the daily prayer guide. But also, for those who are a bit more techie, social media and digital, and be very familiar with what's happening. And actually using it both for your own situation, but also taking it to the prayer meeting. And being able to inform the prayer meeting about some of these things. And some of the things we put out on a weekly basis are extremely relevant to that week, And it's just good to pray for some of these things live rather than in the future or something that's happened in the past.
And I think I would add to that as well, to really invest some time in longer content, reading an article rather than... It's very easy in our day and age to watch, a 1-minute reel on the Echoes Facebook page. Please do, it's great. But also take time to listen to a full-length podcast or, really invest in the depth of understanding as well. Because that will really make a difference to the way in which we think about mission and we pray about mission, and possibly the way in which the Lord speaks to us and calls us into mission.
Well, it's very interesting if you look through various missionary stories. One of the key links that's there is they have been reading about other missionaries and they've been inspired as a result of that. And I think there's a danger we can sometimes lose that if we don't expose ourselves to people who have literally said to God, take it all.
Yeah, and that's actually something that we at Echoes have a burden for, and that's telling modern missionary stories. Telling the story of the person who goes into Central Asia and runs a business. Because that's going to have the influence on others that the person who went across the world on a ship did in the 19th century.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.